Okay, so thanks again for sticking with us. We're really excited about this next panel. I just want to extend another mahalo out to our speakers who have graciously agreed to join us today and to share some of their experiences. So our second panel features 3 Hawaiʻi Island cultural practitioners, community members, and heritage workers, and we're very excited to have them here today. Our first panelist is Mahealani Pai. Pai is a cultural practitioner and serves as the Hawaiian Cultural Resource Specialist in West Hawaii for Kamehameha Schools. He led the restoration efforts of 5 ancient Hawaiian temples in the Kahalu'u Makai Ahupua'a. He holds a BA in anthropology from the University of Hawaii at Hilo and is currently pursuing his Master's of Arts in Heritage Management from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Our second panelist today is Keola Awong. Awong was born and raised on Mokuokeawe on Hawaiʻi Island, and she is a graduate of Konawaina High School and earned a BA in anthropology with a minor in Hawaiian history from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Awong also continued her education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, earning a master's degree in American Studies along with graduate certificates in museum studies and historic preservation. She worked at Hawaii's Volcanoes National Park in many different capacities from 1989 through 2018, and currently serves as the Chief of Interpretation and Education at Pu'uhonua o Honaunau and Kaloko Honokohau National Historic Parks. Our last panelist is Kahakaʻio Ravenscraft. Ravenscraft resides in the Ahupua'a of Onouli in the South Kona district of the island of Hawaii. His genealogy connects the roots of his ohana deeply to the areas of Napo'opo'o, Ke'e, and Honaunau. In his passion for his culture, Kahakaʻio dedicates his time to the practices of kalaiki'i, which is traditional sculpture, mo'oku auhau, the keeping of genealogies, and the spiritual tradition of ritual and ceremony. Through multiple avenues, Kahakaʻio works closely with Pu'uhonua o Honaunau National Historic Park and also as an advocate for the awareness of cultural practices and traditions at Kealakekua Bay State Park. As a board member of Nahoa Aloha o Kapu'uhonua o Honaunau, Kahakaʻio hopes to educate and inspire through the folklore and history of South Kona, Hawaii. Aloha mai kako, and thank you for joining us today.
Aloha.
So what we've done to prepare this conversation and to guide it is that we've sent questions in advance to each of our speakers. And so we're going to really go through the questions and have a talk story about it. So our first question is, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in your current career path / cultural practice. So Mahealani.
So reflecting back on my journey, you know, my family faced, we're at what now is the Kaloko Honokohau National Park, but our family and ancestors lived and caretake at the fish ponds, so Aiopio, Aimakapai, and Kaloko. During that time, they are growing up, went back and forth to visit Grandma Them while we were in Oahu, but coming forward was the history and knowledge of my ancestors was always embedded in the practices that we did. But when in my experience that as a fisherman, the son of a Opelo fisherman, I got to understand nuances and from the perspective of the upena. And so every time when I'm looking at things, I'm looking from the maka or the maka upena of the fishnet. When growing up as young, my dad would throw the net on top of us to see to understand how the i'a feel being caught in the net. And so he always would tell us to make your mistakes on the aina before you go in the kai. And so we always will maka ala, pay attention to never step over the net because the upen is the one that will bring food to the table. Coming forward, I was involved with the public access shoreline Hawaii and native gathering rights. And in my pursuit in trying to understand who I am, that experience helped to shape me, my history and my knowledge of the kai. And I wanted to serve my community, but along the way it become chaotic times. But and then I found and through my life experiences, I was asked to help with the restoration of Heiaus Nanet Kahalu'u. And over time, I've I told them, go find somebody else, get plenty of other people. But they came back and asked me and said, so one of the things I did, always ask permission. At first, I go ask my dad because he's still a part of my family. And dad said, well, you never know until you try. So I went and conducted the ceremony for the trustees. And from then it became, but the condition that I accepted was that not be just ceremonial activity, but you have to have an outcome from that. And so the outcome formulated into the commitment of the 5 trustees for the restoration of the heiaus now at Kahalua Makai. So, mahalo anui.
Hello. Keola?
I guess my start in museum work started while I lived in Hilo, attending college at UH Hilo. I kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be, just kind of, and then I found a job up at the Hawaii Volcanoes. At the time I was living in Volcano, and worked there as a fee collector. And early on, while I was working there, someone was working in the basement. I saw a light on in the basement of the visitor center, and I went down the stairs and was like, hello, is somebody in there? Because I was curious to see what was in this room that had this big metal door and locks and everything. So we went down there, and that's when I first saw that they had a collection. I didn't even know that the national park had a collection. Walked in the room, and the girl there was just a collateral duty, taking care of the collection by emptying the dehumidifier, checking for insects and all of that. So I kind of was standing in the middle of that small room, and there was I could feel a lot of mana coming out of there. So I was like, oh, okay, this is and there were artifacts on the shelves and stuff locked in cabinets. And I asked her, I said, what is this place? And then she said, oh, this is the collection from the park, finds all kinds of stuff in the field over the years, and this is where they keep it. And so I said, so who takes care of this stuff? And she said, well, nobody really. It's just, it's here for us to use if we wanted to put an exhibit up, or if we wanted to, show something special from the park. And this is where we store everything. And I said, oh, how come nobody takes care of this stuff full time? And they said, oh, there's no job. Nobody, they never had a full-time curator. So after I saw that collection and went in that room and felt what I felt, that's what drove me to, then I said, oh, I know what I want to be now. Went back to school. I got my anthropology degree so that I would be able to qualify, at some very low level, whatever kind of job. I didn't care. I just wanted to work with the collection. And then there was a RCUH job that opened up. So it was, so I applied and I got that job working part-time in the collection, got to know the collection. I also worked part-time during that time for the bookstore in the visitor center, and worked on the front line, meeting people, visitors from all over the world. And, it was a good experience for me working in both places, because the rangers that I worked with, they were, a lot of them come from the mainland, and they don't really know our culture very well. So I would share with them. At the time also, I was also dancing for a halau in Hilo, and they always had so many questions about Pele and about this and that, and there's somebody that's doing something in the park that is kind of disrespectful to our culture. What do we do? And I'm like, I think you guys need you need to hire somebody that can help you guys through all these issues. That's not my job. I don't speak for all the Hawaiians. There's many people out there. There's many, kupuna older than me that know better, know more. They would bring all these issues to me because I was one of the few Hawaiian faces working in the park back then. And I just didn't feel comfortable being the voice. And so as I worked in the park longer, I learned that they had, at one time, the superintendent had put together a group of Hawaiian kupunas, practitioners, carvers, hula, kumu hula, and he put them together and as a consultation group so that he could work on plant picking guidance for cultural practice. Because in the National Park Service, they don't allow for the picking of plants. But because of a really good superintendent, and he wasn't from Hawaii, but he when he came to the park, he got to know a lot of the folks from Kalapana, the Hawaiian families from Kalapana, and got to know how they thought and how they felt about things, and how sacred that place is to them. And he wanted to try to build relationship with the Hawaiian community, and so he wanted to write a special compendium that would allow for plant picking for Hawaiian practice. And so he did. And he went against all the national park rules while doing that. But anyway, I got involved with all kinds of things in the park. They're cultural anthropologists. Once I finished my anthropology degree, I worked in the collections prior to that, so I had a good knowledge of what they had in their collection, and then after they had, it was back in the 90s, he had finished his plant picking compendium, and then he to move. He stopped meeting with the group. When I came back to work at Cultural Resource Management, I wanted to call that group back so that they would have a consultation group to get, information, throw out ideas to, and all of that. So we kind of led that group till I left the park 2 years ago.
Mahalo. Kahakaʻio?
Yes. So, aloha. Yeah, I think I kind of got my start in this particular field, doing it, particularly heritage management, done at Pu'uhonua o Honau now, following in the footsteps of one of our old timers that was down there, Uncle Charlie Grace, from the Grace family down in Napopo, Ke'e, all that area. So Uncle Charlie Boy, he did a living history program. You would go down to the national park, walk through the grounds, and you'd see him in there working. He was an amazing lava'i'a, so he'd be making his fish hooks. He was an incredible cord maker, fiber worker, and so you'd see him creating, demonstrating traditional working techniques, how to make the tools, how to put them to use, how to treat the materials, and he would talk story with the visitors and offer mana'o behind the meanings of different things. And a lot of our engagements really were with visitors from afar, from across the seas. But a big impact we had as well was working with the local schools. I even remember when I was probably in the 4th grade, going down to the national park on a school trip and meeting Uncle Charlie there. So Uncle Charlie Grace, he learned from his uncle, Antone Grace, who was a kalaiwa'a and also a kalaiki'i. So Pu'uhonua Honau now features a restored heiau with all these carved images on them. Antone Grace was one of the original carvers for that project back in the 1960s. So anyway, that lineage went from Antone to Charlie, and then Charlie was starting to get a little older and needed someone to pass his work on to. So he, for a long time, actually was trying to select someone. Anyway, somehow at the time, and I really had no background in Hawaiian studies. I didn't complete anything at the university, but I had a little temporary gig as a park guide down at Koloko Honokohau, actually. It was just a 2-month thing, and I got word that Uncle Charlie was looking for an apprentice, so I was able to call him on the phone. We talked for a couple hours, actually. And he asked me, "Oh, have you ever carved before?" I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, good." He'd asked me, "Have I done these things?" I said, "Oh, nope, don't know anything about any of that." So he said, "Perfect. That means I can teach you, and you'll be able to listen to me and learn something." So anyway, that's kind of how he took me on, and I began doing this job as a cultural demonstrator, as an interpreter. I kind of jumped off the deep end with Uncle Charlie, and then very abruptly he passed away. And now I was in this position. I had this job, these duties to fulfill down at Pu'uhonua Honau now, and with very little training. And so I had to kind of figure things out on my own, learn on my own. And as things would happen, I was able to gravitate towards the right people. So I have many people in my life that I consider mentors and guides that have given me the knowledge that I have and have put me on the path that I'm on. A lot of those folks were family members from down in that area, the ohana that that their iwi is down in that place. I mentioned the iwi because taking care of the burial sites in the area is one of the very big aspects of the work I do down there. So anyway, yeah, just kind of, in a sense, got thrown into it and started walking on this path. And it's been 5 years since that all started now. And yeah, just kind of moving forward with what we have to do. Anyway, that's enough about me.
Mahalo. So as each of you kind of hinted at in showing your experiences, there's a lot here for us to unpack. And I think what we'll do next is we'll shift gears a little bit. And if you folks could talk a little bit about your experiences of working, and for some of you specifying or elaborating more on your experiences of working with or within museums and related institutions. And I'll let you folks, whoever has a response first, they can go. So I'll leave it up to you folks.
Okay, I'll chime in. And there's back in the early 90s, Hala o Kekuhi and members of Hala o Kekuhi used to come down to Aiopio and Honokohau, and we'd have couple making workshops. And the whole reason for the couple making workshops was to assist the return of iwi kupuna that were held at the institute, the Smithsonian Institute back then. And I was told that with that one of the brightest, whitest kapa came from Honokohau, so I gotta chime that in. Woot woot. But it helped me to know that the practice of kuku kapa is still ongoing, and coming to people, kapa practitioners, it really helped me to know the different nuances of kapa making, and also to involve in the proper Olean protocol of the wrapping of iwi kupuna. And so I think those that really help to elevate me as a person and to better serve our iwi kupuna community. Also, the return of these iwi kupuna to their proper place is hard to find at times, but knowing that you going back home to that area that they designated Aopo'a, getting close to the boundary at least, or coming home to the Onihanao is important for me for them to continue their moiloa and close that chapter and continue their journey, and that's what makes me happy. And so the museum's assistance in making things go malie or smooth is really helpful too, when you have people who come from your community who understand the nuances of this undertaking. So making those things malie really helps. And knowledgeable people from your own really helps a lot. Yeah, mahalo.
Mahalo.
For me, there are two, while I was at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, there were two main responsibilities that I had while working there. One was working with the repatriation of some of the items that had been in the museum collection for many years, that identified with a cave, Honokoa cave out in Kauai. I think it's more known as the Forbes cave, but 5 items came out of that. So for years we worked on identifying claimants and family that may have been connected to those items. So for many years we worked to identify them, and I think we ended up with 14 claimants. There were no lineal descendants identified. It's NAGPRA working with the law is difficult for Hawaii and for Kanaka Maoli. So we did the best we could with what we had and following the law, and we essentially have, we've repatriated it back to everybody, but the park still is holding on to it until all claimants can decide what they're going to do with it. The claimants have been on different, they've been at odds with each other, so they have been, they cannot all come to a consensus, so we have had to hold on to these things. And working in that capacity was a very difficult thing for me, even as a Hawaiian, to see these families, these organizations, these folks, go to battle almost for these things. What it meant to them, and the difference, their different ideas of what should happen to them were really, really hard lessons. But you grow from those hard lessons, and that's what museum work is. Sometimes it's difficult, it's hard. It's hard to do that that kind of work for a long time, but so for now, that's where it sits. We have to wait till those claimants can come to a consensus, and then we can turn it over to them. There were a lot of really good conversations amongst them as to ideas and what they may do, or ideas for them, to work towards a consensus. But after we met several times, we decided to let them take the reins, meet together, and I don't know where that's at right now, but that's what we had to do. I was disappointed that we couldn't come to a to a better place with everybody, but sometimes that's how it is, and maybe it's just not the time right now. So that was one responsibility, and my other responsibility to be the liaison and with the Hawaiian community and organizations where whenever it came to park development, whether they wanted to put a new parking lot in or do different types of programs, science research, they would run things by our Kupuna consultation group, which was made up of organizations. OHA, they had a representative on the in the group. We had Edith Kanakaole Foundation. We have folks from Kalapana that born and raised there that know the park so well from growing up there. So I kept that group going. We would meet. At one point, we were meeting every month because that's how much work was happening in the park, or that's how much. And so we need to make sure that we consult with them. And in the beginning, it was hard for some because of the history of the Park Service. And you know, I don't know how many of you know the history of the Park Service, but it's not a good one sometimes, and Mahealani knows. So same at Hawaii Volcanoes, the drivers, the people who established that park were Lauren Thurston, those people. And so they actually wanted more than what they got. They wanted to actually go all the way to Kapoho, the Warm Springs Pond, from up on the top of Kilauea all the way down there, but hit a roadblock when it came to the Kalapana folks. They were not going to give up their place, their aina. They fought hard, and they were able to, you know, maintain their place there in Kalapana. But there were other families that were affected by the park. And so getting some of these families to participate was difficult because they had to build trust and, you know, get them to come to the meeting. A lot of them would not say much in the meeting, but they had a ton of things to say in the van when I drove them down the hill. When I came up the hill. So I was that person that was in the park that would help. And I feel like my job was more to try to help the park understand where our Hawaiian community come from, or our people, you know, help them understand these, the way they think. Sometimes they're like a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of the higher up people, management of the park is all from the mainland. So they don't really understand what's going on. And I took my job seriously. I would sit down with the superintendent for a long session of talking just to get him to understand why they feel like that. And, you know, we were able to build a really good relationship with our kupuna. And I hope that they're continuing and keeping that group together, keeping the trust going. A lot of times, you know, the park had to prove that they were listening. Like what Helena was saying about, you know, listen, you know, Pa'akawa, you gotta need to shut your mouth. The national park needs to not say anything. Let these Hawaiians talk. And yeah, and then we do the work. So when the kupuna started to see that, oh, you know, we have this project, and the sulfur banks drive through. He would drive right on top, pretty much on top of the resource. Kupuna was saying, you need to stop doing this. This is, you know, this land is changing. Well, they had to stop for one because a visitor fell. A crack opened up and he fell in and he got scorched, burned. So then they had put up all this orange fencing. to protect the area, which made the area look ugly. And the kupuna came, what is all this stuff? So we sat down and we talked about it. They designed a new boardwalk, and then the kupuna asked if they could just remove the road and let people walk into this experience. And that's what they did. And they followed through with the plan. And once they see these kinds of progress, then the kupuna started to go, hey, they're really listening to us, you know. I feel good, and I want to come to the next meeting. And, you know, so yeah, it's important. And cultural competency is really important for in order to work with these, you know, with each other.
Mahalo.
Sorry, my dogs were just barking. I think they're good now. So two main experiences to share regarding experience working with museums. A big part of it is NAGPRA related. So NAGPRA, of course, is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Usually dealing with NAGPRA, a lot of the times it's dealing with actual human remains. But recently, we've gone on to dealing with artifacts. When I say we, I mean there's a small community from South Kona that has quite a large NAGPRA claim going out right now. It's being processed at several institutions. So anyway, this claim is actually from back in the 90s. It was started, and it kind of got dropped, and because of the way NAGPRA is written, the way the law is written. But basically, our community came in, 10 years later, and picked up this claim for some funerary objects. These specific objects were taken from Haleokeawe down at Honanao back in 1823 by a missionary named Ellis. He calls himself a missionary. He was really a tomb raider. That's what he did all across the Pacific. So anyway, we're looking at the Ellis objects, and the claim process is started with the assistance of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And so the first thing that happens is we put together a community meeting, and we have to meet with a representative from the institution. In this instance, it was from a museum in Chicago. So they send their representative, and when we talk about cultural competency, the very first thing the representative did when she met us was try to refute whether or not the object was funerary. And she would look at passages and say, well, this book calls Haleokeawe a temple. So if it's a temple, how can it be a mausoleum? And just the use of language and the linguistics in it, just trying to discredit the whole claim from the very beginning. Whereas for our community, it was very obvious. We're like, well, yes, it's a temple. And inside the temple, there was this house that was a mausoleum because there were dead people buried in that mausoleum. And this object you have in your collection was laying on top of this person's body inside this structure on this temple. So, for us, it was kind of very obvious that, yes, this is funerary related. Anyway, so it was just kind of the whole experience in dealing with them was kind of a back and forth, a constant rebuttal on terminology and technicalities. And it took a lot of effort just to get the museum to see that, oh yeah, okay, this might actually be a funerary object. That happens in Hawaii. We have our meeting up at Honanao Elementary School, and a couple months later, it was time to formally submit the claim. We decided with meeting with legal experts, having that initial pre-visit from the museum, we decided that we felt there was enough weight behind this claim to actually go ahead and try to submit it. Anyway, the representatives from the OHA felt very strongly that that this claim could be successful. So anyway, we actually get to go to this institution in Chicago. And again, we meet with the same representatives, the people in the repatriation department. We meet with the curators. Oh, and it was a fascinating experience. There were levels of what I would call cultural competency. That okay, yeah, they're trying to initiate some sort of understanding of our community and things like that. And then there were other instances where it was just it was kind of I don't know, it was kind of surreal, going through everything that was happening. There was a real strong effort by the institution's part to prevent us, I say us, our community, our representatives that went, the OHA representatives, so our group, there was a real strong effort by the museum to prevent us from talking with any Native Americans that were working at the museum, that were associated with the museum. When we initially were scheduling our visit, we actually requested that, you know, we're here to visit ancestral items. We're going to submit our claim. There's formal things we're going to do in the Western format. But because these are ancestral items, there's going to be a cultural component, you know, to this visit as well. There's protocol that needs to be done when we're touching a part of an ancestor who was, you know, buried and separated from us, you know, centuries ago. So we reached out with the intention of, you know, who are the cultural stewards of that particular area? What tribes, you know, have their territories, have their treaties in that area? And the museum, you know, flat out told us, oh, there are none. Come to find out, there's a whole cultural division at the museum. They have tribal members who work on staff. They have tribal curators. They have tribal program directors. And these people, the indigenous people from this area, didn't even know that we were coming. And we were a delegation here to negotiate things, to deal with a pilikia that's being housed on their land. And, you know, not by their own fault. They didn't take this item. They didn't want it to be housed there. Really, before we showed up, they didn't even know they had it. It was just an interesting, you know, a really interesting interaction with the museum, and really eye-opening for me. Anyway, that was kind of a funny thing. And then in a lot of the museum's efforts to kind of, I'm going to say, butter us over, you know, this particular institution does have a large, one of the largest Polynesian collections in the United States. Their collection, their public collection, heavily focuses on Tahiti. And in fact, they have a whole layout of interestingly, a colonial village in Tahiti from the colonial period. But it's got streets and vendors, and it really was quite interesting. But other than Tahiti and I'd say Papua New Guinea, everything else was just kind of a hodgepodge of you know, oceanic peoples. A couple Hawaiian items here, a couple Tongan things here, really vague descriptions and things like that. So, you know, just seeing that, it was kind of interesting. They did have a completely intact, superbly preserved marae from Aotearoa, from down Rotorua, I believe. And apparently, the museum had this marae, the full meeting house. It was their wharenui. And they had it with the consent of the people from, I'm going to say Rotorua. I think it was Rotorua. Hopefully I'm not mistaken there. Anyway, their story is that they had the full consent of the tribe, and that the tribe, the Iwi, was very pleased with having their wharenui inside the museum. And they felt really good. Like the museum felt that they were showing cultural competency by saying, hey, look, we have this marae and we take excellent care of it. And look at how happy the Maori are with what we have. And of course, this is, you know, a curator from England and a curator from America, and you know, no one from Rotorua telling us this. But so anyway, we noticed these things, and we kind of started to pick up on the game that was being played. um, and we kind of called them out on it as well. Um, anyway, that claim is still being processed now. So we did go, we met with all the people, they wined and dined us, and then we did all that fancy stuff. Um, and at the end of the day, we submitted our claim, and so it's in the realm of processing right now, which in institutions can go on and on and on. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. This institution is just one of several that have items on this one claim. So it's one claim going to multiple institutions. There's one in New York, one in London. And it's a range of items that were buried as prized possessions with our ali'i, whose bones were put to rest down in Haleʻokeawe. So anyway, that's kind of one of the big kind of recent experiences I've had, and specifically dealing with cultural competency. And of course, the cultural competency goes both ways as well. You know, we want the institution to understand our views, and at the same time, we had to put ourselves in the space to understand where they were coming from. And, oh, gee, why are they bringing us to this table and serving us wine and cheese and doing all these fancy things? Why are they making so much effort to have their nice polished Maori come out and show their marae and you know, show what a good job they're doing? And you know, it was kind of an interesting interaction. One of the things that did come from it, and in trying to not just antagonize them, because it's so easy to do that, but one of the things we tried to do to kind of work with them on this, and to understand that you have an item and we're asking for this item to be returned, and the cultural competency on our part is understanding that this item, you know, is an asset for that museum. It has a value to it, and we're going to remove that value from the museum. So what ways can we replace that value and enhance that value without the museum having the actual item? And so it was kind of cool to get past all the initial unpleasantness and weirdness and that whole situation, and try to come up with, you know, creating solutions to not just going and causing an uproar and being the angry natives, which it's so easy to portray us as. You know, it was a challenge to go in and try to create solutions to that as well. The hard conversations. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. You know, so we were able to have some of those conversations to really express to them the significance of the item. And it was good that they were able to give us a private ceremony with the items. They've taken it off of display, which was one of the first things we asked. So the item is no longer on public view. Myself and a couple other family members, Ohana members from down here in South Kona, were able to have a private ceremony with the item. It's a ki'i, a carved from wood, a very stunning image actually. When we were able to do a little ho'omana with the image. We brought things from home. We brought ava from home. We brought, this is going to sound kind of really kolohe to the National Park Service, but we took some pohaku and some ko'a from down at Pu'uhonua, and those are wrapped up with the item right now. So the item has a little something from home. We were able to wrap it together with kapa. It was given its own designated place in their vault, in their storage area. So, you know, there were compromises being made. And then we were able to take a look at the items from Hawaii that they have in their vault that are not on public display. And we kind of had for me, it was a really cool opportunity to try and help the museum share our narrative, instead of, you know, the museum just kind of putting out these narratives about us that were created by William Ellis and the missionaries that took these things. And you know, one of the really profound moments we had when we were there was we realized this institution has they have an ahu'ula, a feather cape, and This cape is not on display. It's in the vault. It's locked up, and it's the cape that oh my gosh, now I can't remember which ali'i. It was one of our ali'i, ali'i wahine, who traveled abroad and she died overseas. And I'm so sorry, the name is escaping my brain right now. Anyway, this was the cape she was wearing when she went uahala overseas. And lo and behold, the cape ended up making its way to this institution. Um, we didn't have any grounds to put in a claim for it, but we did kind of express to them that you have an incredible opportunity to share a story, um, an empowering story about an indigenous person, an indigenous woman, a member of royalty from a bygone era, from an era of change and transition as well too. This was right in the 1820s. Um, you know, ah, thank you, Kamamalu. Yes, it's the cape she was wearing when she passed. And so this is, an incredible story, an opportunity you have to tell at your institution, and you have the thing. I'm gonna say, this is gonna sound real bad, boxed up in the basement, basically. It was treated well, but still, they have this amazing thing, and nothing about it being, because they didn't know. They were in fact lacking the competency to recognize that, and so we were able to kind of point some things out, slap some hands, and be like, and kind of let them know, like, look at what you have, look at the opportunities you have, and look at what you're doing. And so just anyway, yeah, it was an interesting experience. Opened my eyes quite a bit, and hopefully opened doors for us in the future. We this was a couple of years ago now, and we're still kind of working on processing the other claims. But I would like to one day return to Chicago and to help them with some of that work, and really help tell the narrative, from our perspective. The other side of NAGPRA is again moving a lot of bones, and and so we've oh my gosh, I guess over the years from the 1960s all throughout the decades, a lot of iwi kupuna from down in Honanao, Keokea, Ki'ilai, during archaeological, in that period of archaeology and that kind of boom, a lot of these iwi kupuna got exhumed and put in boxes, and they've been in Bishop Museum for a very long time. So long that our previous resource managers were really desperate to repatriate and bring them home, because they realized that, oh wow, these families have been missing their ancestors for like up to 40, 50 years. And really just the embarrassment of letting that happen. So anyway, I've been sorry about that. I've been working on a lot of these projects to bring iwi home as well. Anyway, yeah, I take up too much time, so that's good for now.
No, sounds good.
Oh, Mahealani, you wanted to say something?
No, these, were the experiences and travels of Kahakaʻio, Keola, and working with the Park Service, I think, is an improvement. You have Kanaka from these communities who are engaged, they're concerned, and they're representing their communities, and they're sharing their leo of concern. And so it becomes important that museums and other likewise institutions have good working relationships with these communities. Long-term relationships is, as you've mentioned, is important, and to continue to nurture those relationships. Although budget numbers will come around, but it's important that the work continues and always constantly try to improve and coordinate to make work more efficient, so that we can allow these iwi kupuna to continue their long eternal rest, and allow artifacts that are, or even have an inventory of those artifacts that have been taken away, and communicate that to communities from which they originate from. I think there's a lot of work to continue, and you know, we're just sitting the tip of the ihe. So that's my mana'o.
Mahalo and Mahealani. I just want to just reiterate something that you said and that Keola and Kahakaʻio have talked about, and it's this importance of having and hiring folks from those communities to work in our institutions. You know, it's so important to have someone from community who understands the dynamics to do that work. But at the same time, you cannot rely, if you're an institution, you cannot rely on this person as the only source of, you know, the only liaison. That's a lot to ask of someone. And so if we are going to support and bring community in, we also need to know and develop ways of caring for and making sure that we're not putting all of the pressure on them to do this kind of work for us. We need to be able to provide, you know, funding and structures in place within our places to ensure that they can do their work without being overburdened with everything else that the institution wants them to do. So mahalo for bringing up these important points.
I just wanted to add that, you know, even though the money is, yeah, it is a resource, yeah, it helps make things go smooth. In some work, you know, there, you know that you want to pass on some of this kuleana. And sometimes it's not about the kala, but it's about training those, or, you know, some get popa kiki ohana members within the community that, you know, they get them. It just, when they pala, when they ripe, when they honor for this type, you know, for that they want to, well, at least the opportunity could exist, you know, just put it out there. You never know. Some one of the most hard-headed ones going like, maybe they're ready, they're ripe, they're pala. Yeah, you can, but can always ask. Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely. All right, so we have about, let's say 10, let's go for about 15 more minutes. And what I'd like to do is we're gonna skip one of our questions and we're gonna combine two of the questions. So what this means is you can address either or you can kind of just address both as you talk. And the questions are, the first question is, how can those who work in museums and like-minded institutions be better allies to cultural practitioners and knowledge holders within the community? And the second question is, how can museums present more authentic and respectful representations of Hawaii's communities and Hawaiian culture to visitors? So I'm gonna go ahead and pop these questions into the chat box as well, so you folks can, if you folks forget it, then you can look at it as well. But I just wanna throw those out there and hear a little bit about your folks' mana'o on how we might be able to do this.
So I think too that, you know, there should be times where these folks to engage in the local community and be immersed in the local culture. Spend time in those communities. You never know. I think that'll help them spend time in those communities. Talk to the people. Try to understand them. Try to understand that unique ahupua'a history and go and mingle, engage them. You never know.
Thoughts, Keola or Kahakaʻio?
I think, you know, yeah, pretty much get the community involved. You know, when folks see a local face in the park service and you know, that coming home to Kona, right now I'm working in Kona and I've been here for maybe almost 2 years now. So it's really nice to be back home I really want to do good things for my community. This is where I grew up. And so this is what, you know, what's driving me right now is wanting to recruit our young kids from the schools here, our public school. You know, so we have a youth ranger program, and what I really want to do is start these kids early. They're in high school, bring them on summertime job. We're working on right now to hire 4 of them. In you know, just a student trainee, get their feet here in the park, teach them, you know, with working with Kahakaʻio at Pu'uhonua now, getting these kids. Every year we do makahiki down there. We get the help from our school, Hawaiian Immersion Schools, Kaimalino, I forget the name, but sorry, but Ehunui, yeah, Ehunui. They come and they're the officials. Kahakaʻio goes to the school and train them. They come to the park. It's such a good program that they have been doing for a good time now. And they do the same thing down at Kaloko. You know, taking these kids and giving them the opportunity. I wish I had that opportunity growing up. You know, I wish they had some kind of program like that. I would have jumped at that, you know. But, you know, I really want to start to recruit kids that way. In the Park Service, they have a Pathways program where you bring these kids on. Then if they go to the local community college, as long as they're still taking classes and they're going to school part-time, I can keep them employed. And, you know, kind of get them ready and get them set up for a permanent job. You know, I really want to start to look at hiring, because once we get our own Hawaiian folks in, or not even Hawaiian, even if they just grew up in Kona, they can be any race, but, you know, having that Kona, being here, knowing the place, knowing the Aina, that's a big plus for these kids to share their culture, so many kids grow up fishing with their dads, and, you know, they have a lot to share. They just don't know it. You know, so that's what I think, you know, I that's one of the really important things I want to do while I'm here in this current position I'm in.
Okay, yeah. So kind of jumping on with what both Uncle Mahea and Auntie Keola were saying, you know, involve the community. That's got to be the first thing. If your museum is in Keaukaha, then you got to talk to the people from Keaukaha. If your museum is in Kalihi Valley, then talk to the people from Kalihi Valley. What do they need from that museum? You got to engage them, and you know, work with community, work with the schools. You know, invest in that next generation. You know, that's part of the reason why we work so closely, or I work so closely with Ehunui Kaimalino school here is because, you know, you have to invest in your future generations. These are the people that are going to be carrying all this work. And I think it's also important, you know, engage with your community, your local community, engage with the local culture, but don't tokenize them. I can say that because I've been the token native at my own place of employment. I've sat at tables and realized that, oh yeah, I'm the token brown guy here to make this conversation seem good. You know, it's important to engage your community with authenticity. That was one of the failures of the Chicago Institute when we went to meet with them in cultural competency. They failed in that they tokenized their Maori, who was there to to represent their needs. It was to justify that. See, look, we're perfectly capable and competent at handling indigenous things, spiritual things, cultural things, because we have this Maori here who's nice and clean shaven and is wearing gray slacks and a nice button down shirt. That's not engaging community. That's making a poster boy. And sorry if that's kind of harsh to say, but it's important that the engagement has to be genuine. It has to be for the sake of learning these perspectives and how to portray this narrative. Anyway, that's what I'll add on to that. Otherwise, I'm just repeating everyone else's mana'o.
Mahalo. The last question that I want to end with, and this is really a future-oriented question, because you've all, and thank you so much for sharing, you've all kind of shared past experiences, current experiences with museums, and have offered suggestions on and provided models on what these institutions can do to bring community in and to create some kind of system and relationship that ensures that we have local people working in our institutions. And so what I wanted to end with is this question: what kinds of changes would you like to see in our local institutions? And what does Hawaii's heritage sector look like in the future from your perspective?
So, like from our earlier conversation, like to see, and it's long overdue, that our political history be included, and that because we know that the history that we have now is wrong. History has been institutionalized, so it needs to be brought up to date, made more current. There's a lot more scholarly work that's being done by Native Hawaiians and non-natives as well, but the history we need to see that evolution, and we need this into what's being presented. Mahalo.
I guess what I would like to see more, and I've kind of been out of touch with the museum community. I haven't been to a museum ever since I finished the museum studies program. So to be quite honest, it's hard for me to say from a different perspective, but from the Park Service, I would agree with what Mahealani is saying, is that, we need to tell the stories, the hard stories that had happened even in establishing our parks in Kaloko, how, displacement of the Hawaiian families that were there before the park became the park. Same thing at Hawaii Volcanoes, to tell that story, to give that foundation for visitors and our local people too. I don't know how many people know about the history of Hawaii Volcanoes, but there's a really sad story about those people from Keala having their lands taken away from them, and when the Park Service wanted that land, and then never taking the compensation because they never wanted to sell that land. So those stories need to be told. I know that Hawaii Volcanoes, before I left, they were going to the Ohia wing. It's the older building that is next to the volcano house. The Park Service has taken that building back, and they're going to change it and make a museum there. So before I left, that was one of the stories I wanted them to tell in that museum. is such an important part of the learning and the growing of us as a people. You know, with all this Black Lives Matter and, you know, those hard histories. And the National Park Service is in some parks across the nation are trying to be more, be more, what is the word I'm looking for? True to these stories and tell the stories like they happen. So yeah, I think things will get better now with all this, you know, these movements regarding, you know, racial discrimination and all of this is bringing good things to light in a lot of museums across the country. Hopefully, a different perspective, bringing that all to light. So. Yeah, we just need to keep moving in that direction.
Yeah, so I guess to add on to that, you know, for what I see in the future, for me, and Kalamaya, this is coming out of left field, but I think a big part of the work museums do when they engage with communities, and when you know, communities are able to help create and guide these narratives, especially in Hawaii, I think in a lot of places it's important to show, you know, that these cultures, their narratives are, you know, kind of educated on, or boy, what's a good way to say it, demonstrated or expressed through the institutions, but the institution cannot define these cultures and these things. You know, for Hawaii, for Kanaka Maoli, you know, we are still a living culture. We're still changing, you know, between generations, between the years, as our climate changes, as our world changes, as our political backdrop changes. You know, it's important to acknowledge all the steps we've gone through, you know, throughout our past, leading up to where we are now, and in allowing that story to continue, because the story is going to continue with or without the museums. But for museums, for that culture, that institutionalized culture, to really engage community, I think it's important that it becomes a vehicle for these stories, you know, to continue to be told and to be added to. You know, nothing is set in stone. You know, we learn from our past mistakes and we make ourselves better. The way Hawaiians did things in the time of Liloa was different from how they did things, you know, generations down the line by the time of Lono Ikamakahiki. And that changed by the time Kalani Pu'u and Kamehameha come along. And, you know, then we had our monarchy. And so things are constantly changing. And I think museums have an important role to play in showing that this culture is going through a living evolution. You know, we're a living culture, we're not a museum culture. We're not like the pharaohs of Egypt, where all that's left is what's inside a glass case. You know, we're still here talking and breathing and doing Hawaiian things. So that needs to be, you know, it's important that that's acknowledged as well. If the museums want to stay relevant and continue moving in this culture, because, you know, this is the place of this culture. So the things have to be relevant. Anyway, and, you know, a big part of that, again, I'm going back to including the next generation, working with schools, bringing, you know, creating student-led projects, creating learning opportunities for local schools, local kids, and things like that. Creating an environment to facilitate conversations with, you know, cultural practitioners and community members and things like that. And not just the people like myself who are kind of ma'a to dealing with museums and what's expected when we sit at a table. You know, it's got to open up to a broader range of people as well. And that's going to take a lot of work, but I think that's an important step, you know, for the future of museums and cultural heritage management and heritage work in Hawaii. I think those things are important. Mahalo.
Mahalo. I just want to thank each of you again for agreeing to participate in this panel and for sharing so much of your experiences with us. I know those of us here are really grateful to learn and to have the opportunity to hear about your experiences and the issues that you face, because these are things that I believe and I hope that our institutions and our folks who are working in museums take seriously and really think through. So now we're going to Q&A, and we'll start off with a very interesting question from my colleague and friend Noel Kahanu. Now don't get too excited now, but the question is, should Kalani o Pu'u's mea vai, so we're talking about, say, for example, the Ahula and the Mahiole, that is at Bishop Museum, should these mea vai be on Moku o Keawe? And if so, where or is Bishop Museum indeed the best and safest place for these mea vai, Ali'i?
So personally, it should come home to Moku o Keawe, but perhaps now Bishop Museum, and maybe as a point of transition back to its place of origin. But in the meantime, for the museum, Bishop Museum for now. And but mahalo Noel for that, you know.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to have it back on this island too as well. I was thinking of where. I think the only possible place currently maybe would be Hulihe'e, but I don't know that they would be able to house that and keep it, you know, all
Secure,
but we just don't have a repository here on this island to house those kinds of things and take good care of them. So it would be nice to see it back home.
Yeah, this is wow, this is an excellent question, and I think it's a conversation that we need to take to our communities too. In regards to our claim with Keawe's items in Chicago, New York, London, one of the things the museum actually used in their defense was, well, what are you going to do with the items? If we do give them to you, how are you going to take care of them? You know, this and that. And really, in one sense, that's really a moot point. It's our items, so give it back and we'll deal with that. But it does raise a really good question for our community. You know, how are we going to take care of, you know, these items that are being returned? I think it's a conversation we need to have with, you know, with our other institutions and just with community organizations. It's a thing to think about, that, you know, we do have these treasures that are out there in the world. They've been disconnected from their ancestors, from the people they belong to, and so how do we reunite these things? And you know, just from that experience at Chicago, I feel like it's a conversation we need to start having amongst our communities, and maybe we need to create places. We have national parks, we have Hulihe'e, we have Bishop Museum. Although frankly, actually one of our claims is for an item that's in Bishop Museum. So even Bishop Museum is still a museum. Putting Keawe's items in Bishop Museum is not reuniting the items with Keawe. It's moving it from one museum to another. So, you know, and that's just my opinion, and that's a conversation that still needs to happen. In the instance of these particular items related to Keawe, because these are items that were in fact touching his body in his resting place and were removed from that, what our community kind of talked about. And so this is just our personal example of what our train of thought was, and kind of what we're hoping to happen. And I really can't even say this is the community's consensus. So yeah, so there's still discussion and mana'o that needs to be brought up. But one of the things we've been talking about, and kind of what we're looking at kind of manifesting, is that we have Keawe's items. Keawe's items are out there. We want these items returned, and we know that Keawe's bones are now laid to rest at Mauna Ala. So one of the things we're hoping to start is creating conversations where maybe we can create a repository at Mauna Ala, so that the items, the moepu'u, are with the iwi they belong to. So that's kind of the consideration we've been looking at. For Kalani Pu'u, it's a little harder to reunite the items with his bones because his bones is someplace secret. Maybe a family down in Ka'u knows, but that's not it's not known where his bones are put to rest. So I think as communities, when we look at these items, if they're being returned, I think it's a thing we have to consider. What was the item? What was its significance? Who is it significant to? And some of these items are significant to multiple people. The reason we looked at Keawe's items going with his bones at Mauna Ala is because Keawe had over a dozen wahine with dozens of children from each wahine. You come to South Kona and just about every family is a descendant, descends in some way or another from Keawe. And that's just South Kona, and his descendants are all over this Pai'aina. So to say that one community has precedence over the item, that gets tricky too. So anyway, the point is, what I'm trying to say is we have conversations that need to happen still.
Yeah, and to add to that, we had that conversation when I was dealing with the items from Honokoa Cave in Kauai High, and one of the claimants actually got as far as drawing up a plan, almost securing some land, Queen Emma Foundation land, now across the street from Pu'u Kohola.
Yep.
That land there for a repository, and I don't know where that's at right now, but Uncle Mel Kalahiki worked hard and tried to put something together for the folks on Moku'o Keawe to have a repository, a place where we could put the items that would come from Hawaii Volcanoes collection and put back down there in Kauai High. So there have been conversations to do that. So yeah.
I think it's important to bring up these conversations as a point to mention that a repository on the different islands is definitely a long-term kind of future-oriented idea of what museums should and will look like in the future. I think, years ago when I was a teeny little intern working in a storage unit on an archaeology collection for Kamehameha schools, that was one of the concerns, was where are we going to store this on island? And the conversation around some kind of central repository is definitely one that keeps coming up, and that I look forward to continuing and actualizing one day. So mahalo for bringing up those important points. That brings an end to our second panel. Again, mahalo Mahealani, Keola Awong Kahakaʻio for joining us today. This was fantastic. Mahalo for all that you've shared with us today. And I want to also mahalo our former panelists, Teresa Funidilo and Helen Sprong-Smith, for again sharing their wonderful research and projects and insight about cultural competency. Before everyone leaves, I want to send you folks an evaluation form that we've developed. This is just to help us track how folks have responded to the event, whether you have any suggestions. So I'm posting it in the chat now. Oh wait, I sent it privately to someone. Here we go. So if you see the link in the chat, you can go ahead And please take a little bit of time to fill it out now. Otherwise, we'll send a follow-up email with everyone so that they have that information and they can reach out to us for future events. Our next webinar will be on July 25th at the same time. That would be 2 Saturdays from now, I believe. And hopefully we don't have any technical issues on that round, but you're all more than welcome to join us. And we look forward to seeing you all again. So with that said, mahalo nui loa, ya oko pakahia pau. Aloha.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Aloha.